Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about myself. My background was software development and project management, and I spent a lot of years facilitating projects in my early career, and then moved up into corporate management, and then decided I wanted to do something different, so I got into process improvement, and have been doing that ever since. So I've done a lot of facilitation in my background. In the process improvement role, I've probably completed somewhere between 35 and 50 Kaizens, and we use the Kaizen format extensively because we have people scattered all over the United States, and so in order for us to get a project done, we have to pull a group of people together at a single location and work really hard to get something done quickly, and then everybody goes back to their location. So it's really important that we make the maximum use of the time that we have available. So with that said, let me I'm stuck, Tom. Oh, there we go. So what you will learn in this presentation. So we're going to talk a little bit about facilitation, why it's needed, some of the common meeting problems that you'll run up against, what is a good facilitator, what are the aspects of a good facilitator, a little bit about group dynamics, how groups developed, how to keep meetings on track, and some of the pitfalls that you run into. And I put these on the end because a lot of times people ask me about specific situations. So these are some specific situations on there that you can use as reference material. We'll talk about them a little bit also. So facilitation, facilitate, to make easier or less difficult, to assist the progress of, and facilitation, the lowering of resistance in a neural pathway to an impulse. I like that. So we're going to talk about both of those. And who is the facilitator? Well, that's the person who intervenes to help a group improve a way it identifies and solves problems and makes decisions. And this came from Roger Schwartz's book, The Skilled Facilitator, which is an excellent reference guide for any of you that are interested in learning more. He also has sections in there about project management because a lot of what he talks about is facilitating a group to move forward. So there's a lot of project management with that. So why is facilitation needed? So if you look at the scenario on top, that represents the historic way that we get things done. Teams come together and then they go their separate ways, and sometimes they really don't understand what they need to do, and then they come back together again and they have to share an understanding, and eventually they get that understanding and they start to gather some data, and then the data must be organized and usually reorganized, and then they have to get together and review and analyze the data in order to reach some sort of agreement. And then they go back to their organizations for new direction, and the project manager is pressing everybody to get their work done. And in the end, no one's really exactly sure what they've collected. And, oh, by the way, this took a long time. The approach on the bottom is the facilitated approach that we like to use, where very early in the process you develop operational definitions, which provide all the detail that is needed for the group to go away and do exactly what needs to be done. This is the only way to ensure an understanding across a group. And then the team can go and gather any data that they need to gather, perform any analysis that needs to be performed. So when they get back together, there's a shared understanding, and they can get to a result much faster this way. So speed is really the benefit to this. So what are the tangible benefits of doing this? Well, reducing scope creep is one of the obvious ones, because as all of you know, if you're black belts or green belts or doing process improvement projects, scope creep is a real problem. Actually, it's a real problem if you're just doing project management, where the more that people try to throw more and more scope into what you're doing. Hey, while you're doing that, can you take a look at this? I hear that all the time. And so we want to manage that. We want to reduce scope creep. And we want to get early learning. So this accelerates early learning by doing the operational definitions at the beginning of the process. And we want to reduce the overall time. some of the intangible benefits is you're going to have team ownership of what you develop. When we pull these groups together, it is their solution that we build. It's not my solution. So they have ownership of the solution, and they are much better at implementing that solution when they have ownership of it. I like this quote. You can do a project without facilitation, but you can also cut your own hair and do your own dentistry. It just takes longer, is more painful, and you probably won't get the best results. Project managers can get results without facilitation, but they are taking a risk that it will take longer and will involve a learning curve they may not have time for. And that's absolutely true. It is more painful, and it does take longer if you don't use facilitation. So some of the common meeting problems that I see, and you probably see them too, keeping on topic is one of the common problems that you have, where people get off topic and you have to wrestle the topic back to what you're trying to solve for. Agree with different definitions. This is what I was talking about when you do operational definitions. I've had people agree, but they both have a different definition of the word, so they're not really agreeing. And I've had people arguing, and they both have this different definitions of the word, and they're arguing about it. And once they get the same definition, they agree. So they found out they were in violent agreement. And then too much talk and too little deciding. And there's many, many more. These are just a few that I see all the time.
Larry? Hi, Larry. Yeah. On that last slide, I have an example I'd like to relate.
Okay.
And it is the different definition problem and how this actually impacted a team that I was working with. I was working in a hospital that was trying to reduce the number of cesarean sections that they gave, and the team hadn't made much progress. We had a meeting where we invited the hospital administrator to come along and to facilitate the meeting. And the first thing he did was he arranged us in a U-shaped room, and I noticed that the people self-selected, and the doctors all sat by themselves on one side of the U. He wrote down, the administrator wrote down the team's mission, and he said, "This is your mission, as I got it from your team charter, and the mission of this team is to reduce the number of cesarean sections in the hospital. Do you all agree that this is your mission?" And the people that were not physicians all nodded their heads, and the physicians all shook their heads. So after a fair amount of discussion, a single word was added to that definition that got a consensus, and that was they changed it from saying the mission is to reduce cesarean sections to the mission is to reduce unnecessary cesarean sections. And with that agreement, that team was able to move forward and quite quickly get to a number of solutions.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. We always have a problem statement and a goal statement when we start facilitating these meetings, and a lot of times there'll even be a conversation about, well, that's not really the problem. The problem is something else, and we'll have to go, or I don't believe that states the problem, and we'll have to go through and we'll have to modify that and get consensus with the group before we can continue. That's a good point. So let's talk about a good facilitator. So the good facilitator takes nothing personally. You have to be Mr. Objective up there or Mrs. Objective up there while you're doing this. You need to ask questions to foster clarity. I've had many cases where I'll ask questions because I'm trying to understand the content of what they're talking about, and I'll have people come up to me at the break and say that they didn't understand it either, but they were too timid to ask questions. So asking questions for clarity, it's a great thing to do. But don't suggest solutions. You're not there to provide solutions. You're there just to keep the process moving. guide the group instead of dictating to the group. That's always the key thing to do there. In remaining objective, I've got that on there twice because it's really important. But I also wanted to point out that there are situations where I'm asked by the project sponsor to make sure that certain scenarios are reviewed and at least evaluated. So I may bring up those specific instances so that the team can evaluate those as one of the solutions, for example. But other than that, I try to remain as objective as possible. Allow the group to make decisions that are contrary to my opinion. Sometimes it's really interesting where the group ends up on their solutions and how creative they can be. And they take it places that I would have never thought. And so it's really interesting to watch that develop and not let your opinions be involved in that. And then manage the group politics without fear of reprisal. Now, you want to make sure that when the politics are going on in the group, you have to address it, but you address it without emotion, and you focus on the meeting process, not contributing to the quality of the result, the meeting process. So a little bit about group dynamics here. This is right out of Tom's book, the Six Sigma Handbook, where it talks about forming, storming, norming, and performing. And you're going to go through all of those stages when you pull these groups together. And what you want to do is you want to recognize where you are so that you can move people quickly through these stages. The only time I haven't been through these stages is when the group has worked together before on other issues or other problems, and they're already used to performing as a group. But if you're pulling a new group together, or even if there's just a few members of that group that are new, you're still going to go through these stages. It may be abbreviated, but you'll still go through them. So it's good to recognize this and to know where you are and then how you can bring people further on through the process. So how do we keep the meeting on track? Well, as I said earlier, I come in with a problem statement and a goal statement so that we know why we're there. That's the goal and the purpose. And we try to keep everybody focused on the goal and the purpose as we move through that, because we keep that problem statement up there on the wall. And then everything else goes on a parking lot. The parking lot is your friend here. That's your objective, is to keep anything that's not related to exactly what I'm trying to solve on the parking lot. And people will generally follow along with that. They'll say, I really don't want to forget what you're saying. It's a good idea, but it's not directly related to what we're doing. So let's put that on the parking lot so we don't forget. And a lot of times I'll put an action item list right next to that. And as we identify action items, I'll make sure that we capture them right there, because I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about them, going over and over them. If I capture them, people feel comfortable that we're going to get back to that. So I use that a lot. Let's see. I think I covered everything on there. Using an agenda. When I'm doing these Kaizen efforts, they're typically 3-day efforts. And we've had people move from all over the United States to a particular location, perhaps Tucson, Arizona, or Denver, Colorado, or some other place. But I make sure that we have a very detailed agenda before we get together so everybody knows what to expect in that 3-day session. And then once we get out of that meeting, we have to use agendas again, because everybody has gone back to their location, and now we're managing progress through weekly meetings. So we need agendas for those meetings to make sure that we continue to make progress. So the agenda is very important in the Kaizen, during the session, and then after. Defining ground rules. I always define ground rules about what is allowed or not allowed during the meetings. For example, your laptop shouldn't be on, your phone should be on stun. We're going to take regular breaks. If if I don't call a break and several of you have to go to the restroom, raise your hand, things like that. The restrooms are down the hall, all those ground rules. And then if the group's going to lose focus, I want to provide some guardrails for that. I'm going to tell them that, don't be surprised if I grab control of it and pull it back to the topic in the meeting. But you have to kind of you have to kind of decide how much of that it may be off topic, but how much of that is really brainstorming, and how much of it is just getting off topic. So you kind of have to let them go off topic and then and maybe spend 30 seconds or a minute off topic and then pull it back, just to see if there's going to be anything of interest there that might be of value. Time boxing is a technique that you can use when you're trying to get some decisions and you're trying to get them in a very timely manner. So you could say we're going to have X number of minutes to talk about this, and then we're going to vote on it and make a decision. And if we can't make a decision at that point, we just take it and put it on the action item list and we solve it later, because we have a lot of other things to do. Make sure that you get all your participants engaged. So you're going to see that naturally there are some people that talk a lot more than other people. And you want to make sure that the people that aren't talking also get to participate in the meeting. So sometimes I will call them out and say, well, I haven't heard anything from Fred, and I'm really interested in what Fred has to say on this topic. So you want to make sure that you get everybody involved. Use the language of the business. I'm working with training some green belts right now, and one of the things that I've talked to them about is be sure that you use language of the business when you are talking to them. Don't use Six Sigma language, for example. So let's say that they get stuck in something in particular and they want to use a Six Sigma tool. Instead of saying, well, we're going to use a force field analysis for this, just say, well, let's talk about the barriers that are resisting progress here, and let's talk about the strength of what we want to, of the progress we want to make. So the point is, you try to use terminology that makes your audience feel comfortable and not feel intimidated. When you got people on the phone, you have to continually remind the people in the room that there are people on the phone and that they need to say their name before they speak. And if you see nonverbal behavior going on, like everybody's nodding their head yes, you need to relate that to the people on the phone, that everybody in the room is nodding their head yes at what you're saying. So just remember that. And then you need to talk about the results. Right before you end the meeting, you need to talk about here's what we've accomplished, and then here's how we're going to follow up. Here are the next steps. We're going to assign the action items, and then we're going to meet on a weekly basis. And that. So use that. Put that right into your agenda when you're doing your 3-day session with them, so that you've got like your wrap up for your last hour where you're talking about this stuff, so that everybody understands when they leave. Here's what I can expect over the next few weeks. So this just shows some of the dialogues that I've run across and that others have run across in time doing this. This actually came from Ron Crabill's website, and he had some things on there which were more behavioral oriented, human behavior. And I'm kind of a student of human behavior. I've read lots and lots of books on attitude, self-image, dealing with people, human behavior, all those kind of books. And those books help you in being a facilitator because they teach you about human behavior. So I would recommend that if you have the time, go find some books and think that I come into the book with the idea that I want to get one thing out of this book that's going to help me to be a better facilitator. So these are some of the specific things that people talk about. One of the things that, like number 3 on that list, I've heard that one before, where someone is trying to get me, the facilitator, to agree with them on something, and I'm trying to remain neutral in this. So I use the language that's on there. Sound like you feel it's inappropriate, or tell us how you feel, or why is that such an issue, or so there's just some different ways to handle that. Let's see. Tom, I seem to be stuck on that slide. There we go. Speaking for others. You want people to speak for themselves. So when somebody says, I know a lot of other people in the group feel this way, I'll ask the other people to speak. Does anybody else feel that way? Raise your hand if you feel that way. Tell me what it means to you. So I don't want just one person speaking for the group. I want the other people to interact and to feel like they're a part of the group also. The other one on there that I've seen many times is it's called super parenting, where I think what Mary's really trying to say is, and that's, I want to hear Mary say it. I don't want to hear somebody else say it. I want them to use their own words. So I'll cut them off, because I've had people while a person is in the process of talking, they'll jump in over them and say this. So I have to cut them off and say, well, I really want to hear it from Mary. We'll get to you in a moment. Don't worry. So you really want to make sure that you get the conversation from everybody in the group. Interrupting, you're going to see that a lot. I had one group that I worked with, and they were they're called account managers, but they're salespeople, and they're very competitive, and they're always ribbing each other. They're always making comments to each other in a teasing fashion. And I realized very quickly in this session that I was going to have to get at that level if I was going to maintain control of this group. Because of these interruptions, I was losing control. So I had to jump in, and I had to start operating at their level in order to keep control of that group. Withdrawing, you want to make sure that everybody participates. And sometimes you may need to go offline with them at a break and find out what's going on, why they're not participating, or is it just not of interest to them, or what, to try to understand so that you can get some participation out of all the people in the group. Because when the group was formed, the project sponsor obviously felt it was important that that person be there. So if it's important that that person be there, then it's important that we understand what that person has to say. And then challenging the facilitator, that'll happen to you at times, and you can't let your emotions get involved there. You just have to stay cool, stay collected, and call people on it, basically. So you need to open it up to the group when that happens. That's the technique that I use. And for example, if someone is challenging me, I'll say, do others of you feel the same way? And try to get other people to speak in defense or not. And if they decide that if all of them decide that I'm doing something wrong, then I'll change it, obviously. But I had one group where it was a very large group. We had about 40 people in there. They were all managers, and they all managed nurses. And we had one person who was continually talking and challenging me. And at the first break, two of the people came up to me, and they were very embarrassed by this lady's behavior. And they didn't know what to do about it. And I said, how about you challenge her when she does that? And sure enough, after that, it stopped. So you can use all these different techniques, to help you get through this. Here are some things that I pulled out of Tom's Six Sigma handbook. These are just kind of some general areas where you've got problems and then the action that you can use. The one that I'll draw your attention to on there is uses opinion instead of facts. Anytime people start spouting off about what their opinion about what the problem is or what the solution should be, I'll just insist that we use the data. Okay, let's see what the data says. we're not going to draw any conclusions about that right now. Let's just drive it with the data and see where the data takes us. So anyway, these are useful to you when you get stuck in those situations. So it takes a lot of planning and effort to do this. Typically, when I'm going to do one of these Kaizens, I'll spend about 10 to 15 hours planning it 2 to 3 weeks in advance of the event. And then the basic rules are keep people on topic and manage the process and clarify. You're constantly clarifying, either clarifying by developing operational definitions or clarifying by asking questions about what people mean, but clarifying the communications. And then the box at the bottom, I put solution is equal to the project times the quality of the solution times the acceptance. And if you, with good facilitation, that makes all the difference in acceptance of the solution. So if acceptance is 0, you've got no solution. So we want really good acceptance, so facilitation helps that. Any questions at this point?
So as I mentioned before, there are a couple ways to ask questions. If you raise your hand, I will unmute your microphone or telephone and let you ask your questions verbally, or you can type your question into the question box and I will relay your question to Larry. So either way is fine. If you have any questions, now's the time. Okay, so I'm going to unmute Victor. Victor, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, following the facilitation or the facilitator role, does that typically, in the way that you're talking about it, include a leader role of the meeting?
Where the facilitator is the leader?
I mean, is the facilitator the leader, I guess is my question?
Not usually.
Okay.
No, because in some cases we will have leaders in the meeting, and I just try to be an independent third party as a facilitator.
Right.
And it doesn't, you don't get the same kind of participation if the facilitator is the leader of the group.
Okay, anything else, Victor?
No.
Okay, great. I have a question here from G. Smith. That's, I don't know the first name, but G asks, how does facilitation change when you are playing both the champion role and the facilitator role?
So that would be like being the facilitator and the leader, if you're the facilitator and the champion. I'm going to assume that's the case. It's tough. It's tough to do, and you have to, especially depending on the leader. I mean, I've seen it. If you're a very open leader and people understand that they will have an opportunity to share and an opportunity to express themselves, then it can work. But it depends on the skills of your leader and their ability to be facilitator-like, their ability to be open and objective. Does that
Larry,
help?
I have a question that relates to this. You have the last two questions have really kind of been along the same line. But do you find that sometimes you're asked to facilitate because the leader knows that they are intimidating and they want to get a person in there to get the group dialogue going?
Absolutely, yes. As a matter of fact, a lot of the VPs in our organization do that because they know they're not going to get the feedback and dialogue if they do it.
Mm-hmm.
And they just know that, so they brought me in specifically for that purpose. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
Sometimes I'm also brought in too, just working with the executive team. So it'll be the chief operating officer and some of the vice presidents, and they're just trying to get somebody who's not directly related to the issue to come in and lead them in a facilitation. So
Okay. Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a comment, I guess, in hopes that this helps. You know, I find the roles of leader and facilitator to be so different and require such a high amount of energy and focus that I, for one, am not smart enough to do both at the same time. But they're just very different, and I just would encourage, you know, those roles to be different. I think in the end, the quality and outputs of meetings are better served.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Victor. Let the leader lead and the facilitator facilitate, two different jobs.